Hello, Alex here for StepByStepMusic.com, your resource for learning and understanding music. If you have learned your major and minor arpeggios but still find them strangely limiting, then this lesson is for you. Today we are going to go beyond the bounds of the basic arpeggio, going into the octave, as well as the inverted fifth, or the fifth below your root. This will give you more options, more good musical choices to make, while still sticking within the safety of your chord tones. This lesson applies to all pitched instruments. Any instrument that makes a note can benefit from this information, but we're going to be focusing the patterns on bass and guitar today. Let's jump right in. Before we jump into the patterns and the concepts of the focus of today's lesson, I want to talk to you about chord tones real quick. Chord tones are the backbone of melodic construction in Western music. Bass lines, melodies, counter melodies. Anytime you're playing a melody, it's based mostly on chord tones. They are the main ingredient for our success. While we're playing chord tones, we're playing tones of the chord. If the band, the guitar, the piano, the horns, whoever is playing a C chord, then they're playing the notes C, E, and G. Mostly C's and E's and G's. Those are our chord tones, tones of the chord for the chord of C major. And if we play C's or E's or G's, we are playing chord tones, and we are likely to sound good with the band. So today's lesson is, again, an extension of your normal arpeggio into more options for your chord tones. If you need a review of your basic major arpeggio, you can find that right here. In case you have not yet been acquainted, I want to introduce you to the octave. And as usual, we'll start with the major scale. So here's my bass. Going to start us off on bass today just for pattern's sake. And I'm going to play my D major scale, 5th fret, A string, if you're playing along at home. So I have my first note, second note, third note, fourth note, fifth note, 6, 7, and 8. Now, if you look at the names of these notes, or the letter names of these notes, the first note is D. The 8th note is also a D. When you have two notes, in this case D and D, and they are not at the same pitch, but they get the same name, we call those notes, we say that those notes are in different octaves. So I can say this is a D of some location, and this D is an octave higher. That's the concept of an octave. And even though we're starting here, for our scale, and thinking of this as 1 and this as 8, 8 is equally 1. So I'm thinking of this as the root of my chord, the root meaning the note that we're building the chord from. So this is my D, my root. This D is also a root. So when you're talking about roots, any D can be your root in a D chord. And the octave is always relative. So if you say, oh, play the octave, that means play above or below from where you're already at. And in case you haven't figured it out yet, this octave also has a shape. We think of patterns on our fretboard as being shapes. So if this is 1, this is the octave. And I can think about this in different ways. I can think, well, it's 2 strings up and 2 frets up. 2 frets up. I went too far there. So 2 strings up, 2 frets up. And that is always going to be an octave. Your first big takeaway for today should be to memorize this shape. Think of fingering 1 and 4 when you're in this closed position, only covering 3 frets. Or think of, again, a note and then 2 up and 2 up. However you want to think about this, I want you to memorize the shape of the octave. It is the exact same shape on the guitar. So if I'm here at my D, 5th fret on the A string, my octave is 2 strings up, 2 frets up. And there they are again. That's the octave shape on guitar. Same as on the bass. And just in case we forgot, this does not work crossing your B string. If you need more help with crossing your B string, you can check out major scales in the B string right here. Let's talk about the 5th, shall we? Again, in the major scale, I'm going to find my 5th by playing up 5 notes. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. The fifth is a chord tone in almost all of our chords. So major chord, major 6 chord, minor 7 chord, major 7 chord, dominant 7 chord, 9 chord, add 9 chord, sus 4 chord, sus 2 chord, not diminished chords, not minor 7 flat 5. But the fifth is in most of your chords. So that's the point I'm trying to make here. So it's a hugely important note in our arsenal of chord tones. I'll tell you what an inverted fifth is in a moment. First, let's look at where it is. So I can think of this 2 different ways. One is I can think of the note. So if I'm on a D, the fifth is A. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So if that's an A, then we could say that the fifth of D is A. Okay, so if I play an A somewhere else, that is still the fifth of D, still a chord tone. If this is 1, this is 5. If 5 is A, then A is a chord tone. Again, I have an A right here, 5th fret on my E string. So I could play, and that could be my bass line, 1 and 5, 1 and 5. But I can play the fifth of D of my chord below where I started, below that arbitrary root point. So I've chosen this as my root. Again, the octave could be my root, but I'll just choose this as how I'm thinking about my root. And this is also the fifth of D. So this works on minor chords as well. Any chord that has a root, which is any chord does have a root, has an octave as well. And that octave is always available because that octave is the same note as the root. So let's take, I don't know, a minor chord, for example. I'm on D here just to stay in the same key today. I'm going to go ahead and go up to an E. So 7th fret on the A string. Here's my E minor arpeggio. So 1, 3, and 5 in the E minor or for the E minor chord. Those are my chord tones. Now I can add this same octave. It's the same distance. We tend to start major arpeggios with our second finger. So if I'm on D, there's my 1, 3, 5, and my octave is here. But it's the same distance from the root, even though I'm using a different fingering. Up here with my minor arpeggio, I'm starting on finger 1, finger 4, and finger 3. But my octave is still the same distance, right? I'm using different fingers. I'm using 1 and 3. Instead of down here, I'm using 2 and 4. But the distance is the same. It's 2 strings up, 2 frets up. Works for any chord, major, minor, anything. Just like the octaves work for any chord, the fifth below, or the inverted fifth, will work for also any chord. Any chord that has a fifth, as I mentioned earlier, that's almost any chord. So as long as we know there's a fifth in there, I'm at D here. I'm going to go up to E. Same example I showed you earlier with the octaves. And I'm going to play my minor arpeggio, but I can also choose the fifth below. If this is my E, playing an E minor arpeggio, this is my root, my fifth below will always be in the same location. Same fret, 1 string down, as long as you're not crossing the B string. Okay, that's the inverted fifth. That is where it is. That's the pattern that we play when we want the fifth. It's below the root, also sometimes called the fifth below. But I want to introduce you to the concept of inversions as well, just very briefly. So what does it mean to invert something? It means to turn it upside down. So it works a little bit differently in music, but it's a similar concept. We always measure from the bottom in music, meaning that I take a 1 and I go up 5 notes, and that note is my fifth. I don't take a 1 and go down 5 notes and say, well, that note is my fifth. Let me show you. If I'm on my D scale again, and I go 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, that is my fifth. What we don't do is I'll count from the octave this time. Octave, huh? You know what that is. Okay, if I count from my octave, I go 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. This note is not the fifth of D. So when we're measuring what the number is of a note, the scale degree, in other words, the fifth comes from scale degree 5. We are measuring from the bottom up. Okay, so I start from D and I go up 5 notes, and that note is my fifth. So since I always measure up, we might notice that this distance is different. So if I go, and that's a fifth, 1 to 5, well, this note is also the fifth. Notice this distance from 1 to 5. Well, if I turn this relationship upside down, this is where the inversion comes in, and I put 5 on the bottom as the bass note, then this distance is not the same. In fact, this distance is a fourth. Hold on to that for a second. The distance from here to here, that's a fifth. The distance from here to here is a fourth. I'll prove it to you. I'll start on A and I'll play up the A major scale. 1, 2, 3, 4. That is a fourth. So if we're calling A 1, and this is really important, who are we calling 1 here? If we're calling A number 1, then D is its fourth. But if we're calling D number 1, and we're looking for A, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, A is its fifth. And so we call this a fifth, and we call this, where we're thinking of the top note as 1, an inverted fifth. All scale degrees in music equate to an interval. So the distance from 1 to 3 is a third. And all intervals can be inverted. Now I want to show you how we can put this into practice. We're going to do a very simple play along today. I'm going to track a bass track for you. Chords are 2 bars of D, 2 bars of E minor, 2 bars of D, 2 bars of E minor. That's it. So very simple, 8 bars. And I'm going to use only chord tones in this bass line and featuring mostly roots, octaves, and the fifth below, or the inverted fifth. So here we are. I am promising only to play chord tones. So whatever you hear is using the magic of only chord tones. It's amazing. I love it. And again, I'll be featuring the octave and the fifth below. We're going to hear 8 snare drum hits, and then we're in. Okay, that was my bass part using only chord tones, I swear, featuring mostly the root, the octave, and the fifth below. A little bit of thirds and fifth above in there as well. We're playing with all of our chord tones here, but really featuring those octaves, those fifths below. I don't know. I'm going to do the same thing on guitar. I'm going to add to that track right now on guitar, and let's just see what I can come up with. Same area of the guitar that I was on the bass, and let's just see what it sounds like. Here we go. Okay, that's your lesson for today. Your homework is to practice what you've learned. Commit that octave shape to memory. Commit that inverted fifth, that fifth below, to memory. Go over the concept of inversion if it's weird to you. If it's too weird to you and this video did not fully explain it for you, just let it go for now. Think of the fifth as being available below the root, and that's enough for us. Sometimes we need to be introduced to concepts more than once in order to really fully understand them and have them make sense to us. Seriously, everything in music is actually pretty simple. It's very easy to understand. It's just not like anything that we've learned before. It's a language and a math, but it's got its own rules, like no other language and like no other math. So if it's a little odd, don't worry about it. Just take a shot at it. If you don't get it right away, let it seep in. That's just fine. Part 2 of your homework, aside from memorizing and not being discouraged about new concepts, is play along. Play along to some songs. Make some backing tracks. Find some backing tracks. Find chords to songs that you like. Play octaves. Play fifths below. Yeah, fifths below. And inverted fifths. And enjoy yourself. That's what we're really doing here. We take our time, we practice, we learn the concepts, but enjoy them as soon as you can. If you like what I'm doing here, your subscription to my channel is much appreciated. Like my videos, make some comments. I'll be happy to get back to you. That is how you can support me as I support you in your musical endeavors. My name is Alex for Step by Step Music. Here comes the bumper. Bye.